Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
And people who might not be either.
Oh, yes. All of our non-binary trans folks who might be out there celebrating or not celebrating our fun imperialist birthday today. Woo! Yeah, woo! You know, if I had a candle for every democratically elected government that the CIA has blown out, it'd be a lot of candles. Oh,
It'd be a lot of candles.
Oh, yeah. As always, you know, what is it if you're just tuning in? Maybe you're having your cookout and you're hoping to hear some nice indie jams. Well, I've got some good news and some bad news for you because you're about to get some political analysis with a nice synth soundtrack underneath it. So at least there's that. Mm-hmm. But this is a program where we dig underneath the headlines.
Are we going to talk about what the establishment media doesn't want to talk about?
I believe we are, Nora. We're gonna cut through all of that tricky dicky propaganda. We interview and speak to and talk about activism at the national, international, and local level. And we call out. Who do we call out, Nora? I forget.
We call out the establishment on its BS.
Oh, that's right. Yes, it is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo, no matter how dope or insightful they may be. So we're going to be joined very shortly by an activist who was helping to organize an event we went to. Nora, while I'm getting her patched in, would you mind telling the folks at home a little bit of context about where we went today and what we were up to?
Yeah, so we went up to East Grand Rapids today for to show up, do a demonstration at the 4th of July, the 4th of July parade they had there, and it was to protest Kent County's contract with ICE. Now, a lot of local counties, like all over the country, have different contracts with Immigration and Customs Enforcement in order to detain people, to keep people who really shouldn't be there detained. Like, they detain children, they separate families. Even when they don't separate families, it's really horrible the way they detain them. And it's not okay that our local government's, going along with that. So we were making a statement that one of the biggest counties in Michigan should not be okay with this. And if we end the contract, then that will cut funding for ICE, especially in the area, and there'll be less people for them to detain.
All right. Well, with that, I believe now we are going to be joined by one of the organizers of that protest that we went to. Christine, could you go ahead and please just introduce yourselves to the introduce yourself, to the folks at home, and tell them what your role was at the demonstration in Grand Rapids today.
Hi, my name is Christine. I'm a volunteer organizer with Movimiento Cosecha, and I'm here with Hemelo. Hi, Hemelo. Hello. Who's one of the volunteer organizers for Cosecha GR. And today we were at the East Grand Rapids 4th of July parade with a group of community members, basically continuing the demonstrations that began last week about family separation, not just at the border, but right here in our own community. And the contract between our county, Kent County, where the county benefits from holding immigrants in detention so that the ICE can come get them and separate them from their families.
So I definitely want to narrow down and kind of what y'all are doing to tackle that at the local level. But just for a little bit of background, so you mentioned, that families aren't simply just being separated at the border. I was hoping maybe you could expand on that for our listeners at home. What does it mean to have a family separated right here in the kind of southwest or maybe more central Michigan area?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that, and maybe Hema can jump in a moment as well. What's been happening with the national crisis right now with parents and children being separated at the border is absolutely horrific, but unfortunately really just, a slight escalation of tactics that are already being used and have been used for a very long time to separate hundreds of thousands of immigrant families across the country. So right here in Kent County, I've been in Grand Rapids for about the last 3 months supporting the organizing work that's happening with Cosecha GR. And almost every single week there's news about, an ICE raid, somebody who was stopped by an unmarked vehicle that was ICE. There was a case of 9 ICE agents breaking into a home and pointing guns at children and taking a parent out of the community. So for a very long time, ICE has served this role across the country in targeting all kinds of undocumented immigrants to eventually detain and often deport them, permanently separating their families.
Sorry, I just realized I had my mic turned off. So, just to rephrase that for the people at home, when I went to the protests on Saturday, one thing that I noticed was a lot of it was directed at the national level, kind of mad about what the Trump administration is doing federally. But, it's important to note that, ICE, they operate all over the country and requires the complicity of, local governments in order to do it. So I know you're honing in on putting some political pressure on the government in Kent County. Could you speak a little bit more towards, how the Kent County government is colluding with ICE and, how Cosecha GR is trying to focus on getting that stopped?
Well, this is Hannah Lowe, and this is a volunteer organizer with Movimiento Cosecha here in Grand Rapids. And what's happening, it has been happening in our communities as families have been separated, not just recently, but it has been happening since 2012 here in Grand Rapids. The Kent County jail has a contract with ICE to hold people on their account, on their behalf, for immigration proceedings, but not necessarily that the people that end up in Kent County jail are detained because ICE or immigration violations. They actually get detained because a broken tail light that leads to driving with no license and then leads to going to jail. And then because of this contract, then ICE will they share information, and ICE will pull hold on those individuals. And actually, this is a incentive for officers to detain people of color, especially brown, thinking, while I have find out either they do have or not have immigration status, they can potentially get paid after the regular traffic violation is clear. Let's say that if you're driving without a expired license or no license, then there's one account. But then you have another account going with immigration that you have incentive because you will get paid $85. The contract says it's $85 per night where they hold them per person for up to 72 hours. So it's an incentive for officers to detain brown people.
So just to clarify that, you're basically saying that not even just county officials, but the police officers themselves are basically there's a systemic financial incentivization that goes to the county government when these potential ICE arrests are made. Is that correct?
Correct. And this is, clear. Also, obviously not unique to Kent County. This is, for many years, this is a specific tactic of the federal government to be able to make the ICE's detention and deportation machine more effective by entering into contracts with local and city governments, specifically for this purpose, to pay these governments to be able to then use their own resources to help ICE target more immigrants. And so we realized that here in our community, as we're seeing a lot of, particularly allies being awoken by this national moment, that it really is an opportunity to inform people, because people don't know these things. People don't know that the county is involved to the level of being paid off to cooperate with ICE in this way. And so over the last week, we've really been starting to build a campaign to target the county commissioners, and really to target the community as well, to be turning out and to be helping people make these connections. That in many ways, what's happening in our community is deeply related to the things that they're seeing on Facebook about what's happening at the border, that's touching people so emotionally at this moment, because that family separation does happen in our community as well, as exactly as it's saying. And if you think about the way that ICE is able to operate so efficiently nationwide, it depends on contracts with cities and counties like ours. And we're actually seeing a wave of protests at cities and counties breaking those contracts in a moment where people are beginning to realize the true horror of what ICE is and what it enacts on immigrant communities. In protest and to non-cooperate with what ICE is doing, people are breaking those contracts, and we want Grand Rapids and Kent County to be the next community to join that wave of non-cooperation.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about the protest that happened today on the 4th of July. It ended up on some local news and whatnot, and y'all were out there, myself included. And I wanted to ask, talk a little bit about, why, just kind of how y'all formulated the kind of visuals of the protest, why you decided to do that, why specifically targeting the parade, and kind of your hopes and how it is, how you can use that to inform and educate the community. I know also y'all did some more outreach work after the actual protest, so I was wondering if maybe you could talk about that a little bit as well.
Well, we just wanted to, the irony about 4th of July, where it's a celebration of freedom and what the nation stands for, and if it really stands for justice and freedom, it's not happening right at this moment. So we want to bring back those memories when people first saw it on the national news, and it was, like Christine said, a wave of national news about kids being separated at the border and being in cages and away from their families. So we brought some made cages, and if you remember on the news, the image was just with reflective blankets. Just we call them space blankets, but so we brought those with us to bring attention to the people that this is, it's not time for celebration, especially for the immigrant community at all, because they're being taken away, and with no freedom that what this today is what's supposed to be celebrated.
And I would just add that Cosecha Movimiento Cosecha as a national movement is always trying to target the public to be able to build sustained civil resistance and non-cooperation. We have a long-term strategy fighting for permanent protection, dignity, and respect for all immigrants in the country. It's based on basically creating moments of moral dilemma for people across the country, to be able to help them see what the immigrant community has always known, that agencies like ICE are are immoral and acting violence on our communities, and that non-cooperation with the systems that are exploiting and harming us, but also depend on us, is the only way that we're going to change the situation that we're in. And so we wanted to really create that strong visual image and bring the question to people really directly. This is happening in your community, and if you saw this picture on Facebook a week ago and it made you uncomfortable, we want this to make you uncomfortable now as well. And we want to ask you, are you with us, or do you think immigrant children should be in cages? To invite then more people to be joining our fight against the contract in this specific case. Longer term in the state of Michigan, in our campaign for driver's license for all undocumented immigrants. And then, longer term for permanent protection, dignity, and respect for all 11 million undocumented immigrants.
All right, so I only had like one wrap-up question left, although I do want to defer to my co-hosts, see if they have anything they want to ask. Lawrence, did you have something you wanted to ask about?
Yeah, Wild Lawrence has appeared. I was going to ask, at this protest, how many people did you ask about abolishing ICE? Because recent polling has came out that showed that most Americans actually agree that we should. That number is steadily climbing. That more people are starting to agree that we should abolish ICE, since ICE was created after the Patriot Act, and it's only exacerbating the situation instead of actually helping. So I wondered, did you ask anybody during this protest how they felt about that as a policy, or did you get any kind of response from that?
Yeah, well, our message in this action was about ending the contract with something tangible in the community that can happen, and we can actually win, which is ending the contract from the King County Jail to ICE. So there's something tangible that we ask from people. Well, and actually, our interview with our interaction with the public, there was attending the parade or watching the parade, was just a simple question around how would they feel, what would they do if the government took away their children, just to set up the tone for our ending the contract message.
And I do think that this strong community turnout, there were also people there, who brought signs to abolish ICE, people who were chanting that, people who jumped on and do have agreement with that. And I think overall, just the people that through conversations, through watching what we've been doing, who have been signing our petition, the community response that we were mobilizing. Well, when we talk about end the contract with ICE, or when we talk about pressuring the different institutions and industries that support or are complicit with ICE in many ways, we're talking about dismantling ICE, about making it so ICE cannot function. There's only 20,000 ICE employees, and so that they're not doing all the work of enacting harm against our immigrant communities on their own. They're being helped by local and county governments and the tech industry and all sorts of different institutions and industries in this moment. And so even if I don't know if the public of Grand Rapids has embraced the language of abolish ICE, but I think what we saw today and what we've seen and what we hope to continue to see definitely reflects that same support for stopping to cooperate with ICE and dismantling ICE as an agency.
Yeah, and I guess taking it county by county, like any of those contracts, is a good way to start getting that going. You mentioned different private sectors also having contracts with ICE, and particularly the tech sector. An example I would like to bring up is Microsoft contracting them using facial recognition software, and how a lot of employees have resigned over that, and a lot of people are threatening to boycott Microsoft as well. Is there any major companies you can think of, tech or otherwise, that we should boycott for their contract with ICE?
Well, yeah, I know that there's not just within Microsoft. I know Google, Apple, Salesforce, there have all been kind of internal movements around employees threatening to or quitting, and also talks about that. And I know there are kind of larger lists going around on the internet right now about different like all the different, it's because it's not just tech, all the different corporations that work with ICE and profit from it. So I would definitely encourage people in general to kind of dive into that. Cosecha nationally is actually calling for a national day of action on July 31st to abolish ICE. And kind of the first step in that, you can kind of find information about that on Facebook, and we're having community organizing calls to talk about really locally what are targets that make sense for local communities to be, just the way that we're having this campaign against the county's contract with ICE here, just at the county level, how people who are coming into this movement to abolish ICE for the first time can identify local targets that they have real power to change and to push.
Oh, do you have any questions? Okay, so I saw in a recent article that the Canadian government offered to take in refugees that have been banned by the U.S. And it was mostly referring to, I believe, countries that were put out in the so-called Muslim ban. But I just wanted to be as something I wanted to be sure of, wondering if that's, I guess, another route that people have thought about for people seeking asylum, because a lot of people fleeing Central and South America really are fleeing violent situations that they can't be safe from. And if they had a pro bono lawyer in the U.S., chances are they'd be able to, get asylum here legally. Now, can you talk a bit about either of those?
I mean, to be honest, it's not a subject that I can comment significantly on, because it's not something that I know about extensively. I do know this is a moment where, many different tactics are necessary to be able to both challenge the overall anti-immigrant policies and to be able to provide immediate aid and alternative networks of support to people who are directly impacted about it in the moment. In the long term, Cosecha's strategy is saying that undocumented labor, current labor, and future labor, the United States depends on the exploitation of this labor. And so our long-term strategy is mobilizing that community to non-cooperate with not just ICE, but the various different industries and institutions that depend on the exploitation of our community to be able to win permanent protection, dignity, and respect. But obviously there's a lot of other things that are needed in the moment to be different avenues and alternatives for people in the moment.
All right, thank you oh, sorry.
And I was just going to add a few lines about that. And it happens as well when we fight here locally. Like last year, we fought a equal rights policy with the city of Grand Rapids, where the city of Grand Rapids employees should not ask about immigration status. And those city commissioners were deflecting responsibility. Oh, well, you can also go to the county and talk about the contracts. And then when we go to the county and push this and the contract policy or this ask, we would get deflection. No, it's not our responsibility, and all these things. So I just add to the news around Canada saying, yeah, we'll take the refugees. A lot of the people that coming up north, they probably already have ties here to the United States with relatives and people from their community, and there's not a time of deflection from the United States to say, oh, we just send them to Canada or Mexico or other countries. So it's time to make United States responsible and moral responsible to take on refugees, and then just because they don't have that. We also need this talent from the South to continue the industries where predominant and they are immigrants are needed. The talent is needed in agriculture and the hospitality, business, all these industries. They depend on the immigrant labor, and then, but like Christine says, they're being exploited just because of this situation. So we can also see some deflections about responsibility on their regard.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for taking the time to talk with us on the show today. I did want to ask just, if people are interested in helping out in whichever way they can. I know us folks down here in Kalamazoo, we're putting our own public pressure on city officials to not not coordinate or work with ICE. But I do know we don't actually have any detention facilities being rented out here in Kalamazoo, but nearest are Battle Creek, and of course they're in Grand Rapids. So what could somebody from Kalamazoo do to really help your cause up there in Kent County as far as getting ICE out of GR?
Well, we encourage to continue to share and amplify the work that Cosecha GR has been doing to help us reach kind of the largest audience in Western Michigan on our Facebook page, Movimiento Cosecha GR, and in the group that we now have a Facebook group for organizing to end the contract that's open to all, and we definitely want a diversity of tactics and advice, since we've been fighting similar fights in Kalamazoo and GR. We do have a donation link on there as well to support the grassroots immigrant-led organizing that we're doing here. I would say please check out our Facebook page and help us amplify the work that we're doing, because we have a lot of momentum right now and we really want to continue to build off of that.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the show and take time to talk to us. And again, thank you for organizing that very spirited protest up there in GR. I think it really pushed the issue into people's consciousness, and hopefully, we can keep building that momentum up. Please have a wonderful, fantastic day. All right, ladies and gentlemen.
You too.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for joining us.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, it's about 5:30, so seems right about the time to go ahead and take a break. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Are you trying to get your local business's name out to the WMU and Greater Kalamazoo communities? Why not do so while supporting Radio Evolution through underwriting and donations? For more information, please visit widerfm.org.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Just wanted to recap real quick. We just had a really great interview with some Cosecha organizers from GR talking about their push to get ICE out of Kent County and Grand Rapids. And
that was really enlightening.
Yeah,
that was really enlightening. And the fact that ICE has they can operate 100 miles from the border, but that's not just the southern border. That's also the northern border too. And it was a story of a young Canadian woman jogging, and she accidentally crossed the border, and ICE detained her.
Oh, I heard about this.
Yeah.
Literally, and literally, yeah, it's like and the way they actually framed it, it's like she was jogging on the beach, and the actual sign was about like 20 yards away on railroad tracks that was obscured by bushes. So this. But here, a lot of right-wingers talk about like the security of our borders and how open borders are terrible, and it's like, but you're going to detain a woman for jogging across an imaginary line? Is that?
There's a couple things that's been happening in this week of stupid. You had people on NRA TV talking about how how we should destroy, speaking against the First Amendment. The NRA TV, whose whole station is based off the Second Amendment, is not for the First Amendment. And the criticizing America on 4th of July is un-American. Like there's this whole notion of criticizing this country and our lack and willingness of revising history and whitewashing political figures to serve a narrative, and our country likes to do it a lot, and it's really irritating. It's really upsetting. It is detrimental to our society.
Oh yeah, man, and I think we definitely want to dive in a little bit more about kind of the American history we're taught versus as it really exists. I did want to one last thing with the ICE subject though, Nora. I've seen that post or that tweet. Is it tweet?
Yeah,
tweet?
There's
oh man,
this is an
some
article
heinous
yet,
stuff.
but there's this
related
thread
to
on
ICE.
Twitter. This long story short, this trans human rights advocate and leader has been who's a U.S. citizen, by the way, has been kept out of her country because she needed to get more child welfare records to prove U.S. citizenship, despite having a female being on her ID with her new name since 1999. Then you're demanding proof of transition and all this stuff. And keep in mind, she's this big human rights advocate, and she's mute. So this could be partially due to other lack of advantages that she has, or political retaliation. But I haven't heard of this happening to other trans people yet. But this is definitely something we should keep an eye on. Customs and Border Protection, if you, like I've said before, if you come back to the U.S. and even if you're white and a citizen, they'll still kind of be a dick to you and ask these intrusive questions, and they're cops, and they're just generally not really pleasant people. So keep in mind, this is kind of the collateral of our overly hawkish, border-obsessed immigration policy that's making it harder for people of different stripes to return. And definitely do watch what they do to trans people, because that's also a demographic that this administration is regularly trashing upon.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's the things that they were talking about are things that black people and other minorities have been talking about in this country for years when it comes towards police and how they treat people. I mean, it's all too familiar. It's just all too familiar in this country. Yet it's not. We like to say that we've been moving forward, but we don't like to address what's been going on in the past, and it just keeps replaying, just in a different, on a different field.
I mean, it's crazy to think about how much of what is going on right now just basically everything has a precedent in our American history, and it's been this collective idea that, that's our bad past, and we've collectively as a nation moved on from it, when really like many of these injustices have been going on like quietly in the background or been willfully ignored by most people.
I mean, there was a story in the news about a study that the Trump administration did not want to publish because they were finding that toxic water was being pumped onto military bases where military families are being held, and they were trying to hide the story. That was another story that's being underreported, and we should talk about later in the show.
Oh yeah, so I think one of the things we did want to hit on, and you know, you're talking about it a little bit. I mean, if we're talking about America,
you want to hit my story?
Yeah,
all right.
Let's do that.
Let me preference everybody. Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk was talking about a tweet that made him angry, and it also infuriated me. Are you gonna play the clip, or are we gonna just?
I mean,
I could just speak about it.
Yeah, I think we probably speak about it.
Okay, the clip comes from one of 4 journalists. The tweet comes from one of 4 journalists that was actually at a press conference. The Pentagon was putting together to talk about what was going on in the war in Afghanistan. Only 4 journalists was there at this press briefing.
Not 14.
Not 14. Not 40. 4. And you want to talk about the sad state of our journalism? Let me remind everybody that we've been in a hot war, in the war of Afghanistan, since 2001. We've been in Iraq since 2003. We have spent $10 trillion over the course of both of those wars. And is Al Qaeda? Al Qaeda now controls 39 to 40% of Afghanistan, more than when we started the war. They control more territory now than when we started. So objectively, we have failed. And the fact that the Afghanistan government is actually doing a peace treaty with them so they end the war. So if you ask our representatives or anybody around, what does victory look like, or when we should pull out, I think this is a good time to get our troops out of a country that didn't attack us in the first damn place.
Yep. Not only that, go ahead.
Something
Nora.
else that's pretty telling about the sad state of journalism is at that White House press correspondence dinner thingy, when somebody shouted out like, "Hey, what about Julian Assange to stand up for, you know, a very good journalist and a remarkable truth teller? Like, he got escorted out. They got rid of him. Like,
yeah.
Talk about freedom of the press. Like, there it is."
Huge side note here, but there's this letter. Well, it's a letter signed by several Democratic Congress members, basically calling for Ecuador to end stop providing asylum to Julian Assange in violation of international law. I do believe Debbie Stabenow was one of them.
That's not surprising.
Yeah,
but. Just to get back on this topic.
No, maybe I'm confusing her with Dianne Feinstein. So
it was probably.
It's kind of hard to tell.
It's not. I feel sad. I feel sad that's. We're gonna speak on that a little bit later. But just to get back on this topic, the thing that pisses me off about that tweet and our sad state of journalism. If you have any type of sensationalism going on in the news media, they'll cover it 24 hours. They'll cover it for a week. Mm-hmm. They gave Maxine Waters all kinds of hell because Maxine Waters was telling people to use their First Amendment right to tell state officials and politicians how you feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
she wasn't calling for violence. She wasn't calling to harm people, but that got news coverage all week because it was the sensationalism bias over talking about something that we've spent $10 trillion on.
Trillion.
$10 trillion. Let me remind everybody that Bernie Sanders' health care plan would have cost $70 to $80 billion. His universal free college and tuition would have cost actually $80 if you look at the Harvard study that actually studied it. The 300 billion that we just gave our military could have wiped out every student loan, wiped out all of the student loan debt that's in our country.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good number to bring up because even not just talking about Afghanistan but Iraq. Like so that is a war that both Republicans and Democrats will concede was an unnecessary mistake. You could. All of these programs that both Democrats and Republicans will tell you are pie in the sky, will never work, where are you going to get the money from, could literally have been paid off with probably 0.1% of an Iraq war.
It's a rounding error in comparison. In comparison. Okay, go ahead, Nora.
Okay, so we talked about how out of control military spending is on the show quite a bit, and it's good that we actually expose this stuff. But if you want, more info specifically of what we now know about the $21 trillion that went missing of the Pentagon over the last 20 years.
I didn't even speak about that.
Yeah, you can go listen to The Redacted tonight. Did an interview about it. I think his name was David DeGraw.
Yeah, Lee Camp. Yeah, Lee Camp and
yeah.
DeGraw. Yeah,
it's good
man.
stuff.
The other part about, and that's another thing, the Pentagon hasn't had an audit in multiple years, and it was in 2015 where they admitted that they lost 5.5 to $7 trillion of our money. That's our money. Every taxpayer that's listening to this, that is your money that our government is wasting. And let me remind you that Flint still doesn't have clean drinking water, that 1/3 of major cities in this country doesn't have clean drinking water, and that Puerto Rico the majority of Puerto Rico don't have power. And let me also remind you that it's those same, and this is bipartisan. This is a bipartisan problem, and the fact that the news is not covering the fact that we are still sending young people to die for multinational corporation interests is a problem. And the fact that it's not being brought up much more often is a problem. It goes to the cognitive dissonance of our journalism, of the media that we have, and the citizens of America. We have to be vigilant about this. The reason why you can't have health care is because we're spending the money to bomb people who do not want us in their countries. And the fact that we could cut our military budget in half, we could eliminate half of the military bases that we have on this planet, and we would still have the largest army in the world. We would still be outspending the majority of the 9 out of 10 countries that we spend more money than, which 9 of them are our allies, and we would still have the largest military on the planet Earth. Like it literally just makes no sense.
Yeah, but that's America for you. You got to be the biggest and the boldest and the baddest and the strongest. And
we're number one.
We're number one, America. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. On this, and this July 4th, something we should, is also important to bring up. We talk about a lot of this stuff on the show before, but probably one of the most hypocritical things that goes on with our government right now is, you would think with all of the rhetoric about how we need to support our troops and we should be good to our troops, especially from Republicans, they would not subject them to the same kind of neoliberal experiment that they have the rest of the economy. But as we speak, Trump just appointed a guy at Veterans Affairs whose main mission in life is to privatize it.
Wait, he successfully appointed him now?
Yeah.
Oh,
that was that story was from about a month ago. But yeah, and as far as I know, he got appointed, but there's been some public pressure kind of putting checks on keeping him from actually going forward with the privatization of the VA. But one of the things that gets pointed out by a lot of progressive politicians, such as Bernie Sanders, is that the VA, for all its faults, is still like one of the most functional best in delivery of health care systems that we have in the country. A lot of people point to it as an example of how single-payer health care could work in the United States.
It has over a 75% approval rating by veterans. Yeah. It is popular to veterans, and there are some veterans who do not get. Yes, there are problems with it. There are veterans who have to be put on wait lists and do not get enough care that they deserve. There are some people who live like in Guam and the American Virgin Islands who do not get the care that they deserve, and they're also veterans. American Somalia and things like that.
Samoa.
Yeah, my bad. Not Somalia.
We're bombing Somalia.
We're bombing Somalia. Samoa. But there are those type of problems. But the VA, like you were saying, does work. But because you're going to have it's under Republican control. So what do Republicans do? They say government doesn't work. Let us destroy everything that deals with the government so we can prove that it doesn't work.
Government doesn't work. Elect us and we'll prove it.
No. It's like saying, hey, this stove doesn't work while I smash this stove with a sledgehammer. See, it's not working. Hit it with a sledgehammer.
It's like I guess you'd call it like a shell game or like a really bad magic trick. But yeah, I mean, like they do with so many other things, they have tactically and institutionally, and this is the reason why it'll be such a hard time to get Republicans to vote for something as simple as like increasing funding to the VA, because they want the VA to fail so that after they've defunded it or not giving it the funding it needs, they can say, oh, look at it, this program's a failure, better privatize it. Our solution to everything that hardly ever actually works.
Oh, I mean, just to add to that, there's a story that the Young Turks covered yesterday, and it was talking about how, since we're talking about the troops, there are military bases all over the United States that have poison water. Where these military veterans and families are staying on. And it was saying that people are consuming these drinking water. The people who are living on the military bases are consuming drinking water, and the study showed in a couple years ago during the Obama administration and during the Bush administration that if there was like something, I forgot what parts per trillion. If it was in the water, it was still drinkable. And they were doing more research over it over the years, and they found no. If it's in the billions and not trillions, if it's in the billions and it's still in this drinking water, then it can cause liver cancer. It can cause skin lesions. It was a division of the Department of Health and Human Services, and it was an 852 review of their. This pH. It's the residue and stuff from firefighting foams that they use in their that they use in their carpets, that they use in actual lining. Let me actually read it for you. This is from the New Republic. ATSDR. A division of Health and Human Services quietly published a 852-page review of, I don't know how to say this word. What is this word? That word.
Hold on a second. We're going to attempt to pronounce a word on the radio, folks.
This word.
Perfluoroalkylus.
Okay, let me see. Yeah, I got the English degree. Maybe it'll come in handy here.
The extra long one. The extra long.
Perfluora alkalis.
Yeah. Sure.
Perfluora.
Yeah. We're gonna roll that.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
It's good.
Or PFAS was used in everything from carpets to frying pans, firefighting soap, and it was on fire pans coating. And what they were basically saying was that if this chemical was basically in their drinking water, that it was causing skin lesions, cancer, liver cancer, and things like that, and it was on a majority of military bases. And the study just recently came out, and the reason why it was quietly released is because a lot of the donors to Trump's cabinet are the same people who make this chemical and make these products that are on the military bases. So
Democracy Now! Has talked about this too, and the EPA has been like avoiding publishing this because it'd be a PR disaster, as if Trump's EPA doesn't have enough of those at this point.
Oh yeah.
Something interesting, I guess, like to bring it like maybe not necessarily local, but a bit regional. This I think a semi-famous example is how when there's a Legionnaires breakout at a VA facility in Illinois.
Yeah,
I heard about that. Like their governor, they have like a Republican governor that's interestingly socially progressive. Like he signed LGBT rights. He made Illinois the second sanctuary state. But like this Legionnaires breakout in the VA of Illinois, like just like screwed his polling numbers. Like he's the least popular governor in the country right now. It's almost certainly going to get voted out this year.
Well, I mean, we talk about supporting the troops, and we talk about how we should care. If the families of our troops and the troops themselves are living on bases where their water is tainted with chemicals, then maybe that should be a priority or a story that should be talked about. And that should we talk about 4th of July, and we talk about this country. We don't even care about our troops.
Yeah. And beyond even like veterans care, also thinking about like where do we actually send our troops and why. I wanted to briefly mention there's this article I read talking about how it's funny because this article that I was going to talk about is from June 28th, so just about a week ago. And in recent days, it's starting to come up in the national news that, the Trump administration might be backpedaling, or that North Korea might be backpedaling on the nuclear deal. And, it's interesting to see like this. This is an article from Mint Press News, but I think it just points out some of the hypocrisy and BS that really is revolving around what was a very promising peace deal, and it basically
they didn't have a deal, man. They didn't have a. They
didn't. Okay, not yet. Not
like
promising motions.
Yeah,
peace,
they had a good conversation, and I'm sorry to cut you off or jump.
Oh no! Please clarify.
The thing is that if you saw for what the reporting showed is that they had a conversation. And that was it. There was no way for America to verify that they were going to do said things. There was no actual verification that North Korea was going to demilitarize or denuclearize. The conversation that they had was them moving towards an actual deal, but they didn't have a deal because of the incompetence of our president in his administration. As much crap as the right wing was giving President Obama when he was negotiating with Iran, the Iran nuclear deal was working, and it made sense. It made sense because we had a way to verify that they were actually doing what we asked, and in return we gave them back the money that we stole.
Yeah.
See, I was under the impression that we did officially make a deal that had like a toothless resolution to monitor North Korea's nuclear abilities, and this is probably a misconception I'm sure many other people have had going into this, but I would not put it past Trump to cancel that deal, even if that was the case.
There wasn't
the best deals, believe me.
There wasn't a way for America to verify that North Korea was going to do so. There wasn't a guideline that North Korea was going to cooperate with us. It was Kim Jong-il getting praised by Donald Trump, who wants to be a dictator just like Kim Jong-il, and that was it. That was it.
See, what I was getting at is that, like, it might not necessarily be a bad thing that if we don't monitor their nuclear capabilities, because Pence brings up, let's do the Libya model on them. What did Libya do? They denuclearized and we invaded them. So it might not it's crazy for me to say even on the air, but it might not necessarily be a bad thing that North Korea doesn't denuclearize in this instance, that we don't try to escalate, that'll deter us from actually escalating with them.
But the thing is, North Korea's smarter than Trump. They know they've seen they saw the Libya model. They saw exactly what happened with Gaddafi. So yeah, we're gonna denuclearize so that they can devastate our country again. Oh hell to the no! Yeah. So, and this is the other problem. This is the other problem that I have with this American exceptionalism or whatever. We just openly threaten another country, saying that we're going to do the Libya model on them. Just imagine, folks. Just imagine if Russia or China or Mexico or one of the countries that when we pulled out of the Human Rights Council, or we pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, that one of those countries was like, maybe we should do the Pearl Harbor method on America, or maybe we should do the 9/11 method on America. What? How do you think our country would respond? Like, are you kidding me? Like, it logically makes no sense. And the other thing about, and I'm going off this tangent, but just to bring it back, North Korea wants to have a peace deal with South Korea, and they want to have a peace deal with America. The reason why is because they're authoritarian dictatorship, and they want to be looked at as being legitimate on an international stage. But at the same time, they're not crazy. They know America's trigger happy, and they're trigger happy too. So yeah, they're not going to denuclearize, because we've proven during this administration that even if we have a deal with the rest of the world, we have no qualms with saying, we don't like it, we're going to scrap it, and we might just overthrow your country just because. That's our playbook. Mm-hmm. That is the Donald Trump playbook. I'm going to screw you in the back end. I'm gonna screw you on the back end of our deal because it benefits me, and I just don't care about. It's the screw you, I got mine way of dealing. That is the Trump's philosophy, and that's what he's doing on an international level.
And I just did want to mention, before we go to the break and kind of move on to another topic, again, it all goes back to the money, Lebowski. All right, we got it's because it's the main thing. It's Mattis, who he's got all of these deep connections to defense contractors, and there was actually a report from basically this economic think tank that he follows and is part of, is basically talking about how peace in Korea is going to be devastating to U.S. arms manufacturers.
Oh my God!
And that friction between Mattis and his stipulation to make sure we still have that personnel, we're still spending money out there, and Donald Trump accidentally stumbling onto a correct policy position, talking about pulling our troops out of there. I mean, the problem is, Donald Trump doesn't have any kind of actual ideological reference point to back up these ideas. It's not that he wants to do this for peace or to make the world a better place. He wants to do it because, you know what? It sounded like a good idea at the time. This will make me look good, but, let Mattis or the CEO of Raytheon bend his ear for a few minutes, and we're right back where we started. Yeah. All right. So I guess with that, let's go ahead and take a break. We'll shift gears and talk a little bit about, I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about. Well, we'll figure out what we'll talk about next when we're on the break. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
This is Maria Bamford. Oh no, I screwed it up. Okay. This is Maria Bamford, and you're listening. Oh, I did it again. This is Maria Bamford, and you're listening to WIDR-FM.
WIDR is proud to be supported by Pedal Bicycle. Pedal Bicycle has 2 locations on 611 West Michigan Ave and 185 Romans Road. More information can be found at pedalbicycle.com.
Is your RSO looking for new ways to get its name out to Western's campus and the greater Kalamazoo community? Why not use the wider airwaves? For more information on how we can work together to promote your organization and events, go to widrfm.org and click on the Airtime and Sponsorship page under the Support tab.
Let's jump on that.
Ladies and gentlemen, okay, I was just talking. Okay,
so we figured out what we want to talk about.
I was talking to Nora on the way over here. We were having like this sidebar chat, and I was like, "Don't I always start the show by saying wider listeners?" And Nora was all like, "No, you start by saying ladies and gentlemen." And you know, it's an affectation, and it's like, you know, I should say like comrades or wider listeners because it's like, you know, it's
Gender neutral.
But yeah,
look, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cats, dogs, and everything else in between. Let's just have a really good conversation. Let's not get stuck on formality, and we don't get to the actual topics and stories.
No, it's just a funny thing.
I know.
Yeah, it's an anecdote.
Yeah.
Say, listeners, comrades. How many of you in
listeners,
Kalamazoo County? Shut up. I'm saying a thing. So how many of you that live? How many of you that live in Kalamazoo? What, like, really want so badly, more than anything, just another stadium, like just another stadium. How many of you just want it? Like,
well, you know what? Southwest Michigan First CEO Ron Kitchens thinks it's a great idea. You know what he has to say? He says, if we want to talk about the future and recruiting more Gen Xers, millennials, and college-educated individuals, now is the time to invest in things that are important to them. We as a community aren't doing anything of substance to keep these people here. An event center goes a long way to saying, we get you and are committed to doing really big things to keep you here. Oh boy. Okay, there's a lot to unpack from this one.
Okay, so you know how you talked about why Kalamazoo's in the top 50 of worst cities in America. Mm-hmm. You remember the reason why? You remember the reasons why we are on that list? The minimum income of most people who live in Kalamazoo is below the national minimum wage. There are people in this town who's dealing with air pollution and water pollution, especially on the north side and east side. I'm sorry for all my parchment people who are listening to this who also was affected by that. And we also have lower education. We have lower.
We have bad public schools.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm thank you for helping me out with that. So instead of putting money into those things, like the Kalamazoo Promise, like fixing our infrastructure, like raising the minimum wage and getting actual jobs to stay here and be created, we're gonna build a stadium. We're gonna build an event center.
Taxpayer funded.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to push for a ballot initiative to increase taxes on, get this, restaurants and drinks to pay for this. And it's kind of funny how West Michigan First really didn't like taxation earlier when it was going to the bridge.
It's like give you a little background. We talk about it on the show a lot, but just one of the things that most infuriates me about this is Southwest Michigan First, the same business group that Ron Kitchens is the head of, and they're pushing this stadium for.
They call it an event center.
They call it an event center. Yeah. They when we were talking about taxing the rich as a way to deal with our tax problem, to deal with the fact that Kalamazoo was broke, Southwest Michigan First bullied our city government into not even thinking about it. They literally said, if you put this on the ballot, we will crush it, and we will remember which of you decided to make this a ballot initiative to do a progressive income tax that would have taxed the rich. And of course, what came from that was the Excellence Foundation, which essentially is like, oh no, the rich are going to subsidize the budget and get a huge tax break out of the deal. So it's funny to me that they will go out of their way to stop a tax that directly affects them, but when it comes to building this pet project, this stadium, which is basically going to, again, really help the private sector. And we'll talk a little bit more about how stadiums and event centers work in other cities, and how it doesn't really help the community as much as they say it will. But they want this to come from, spending extra money when we go out to the bar, when we go out to restaurants, the average common folk. They want to put the burden of that on us, while they themselves refuse any kind of taxation on their billionaire butts. So.
It's not like we don't have an event center here in Wing Stadium. It's not like we don't have events in Kalamazoo when it comes to Greek Fest or Island Fest or things like that. But look at what they have done. We can't even use Arcadia. A lot of events had to move away from Arcadia Park because of them raising prices on the events. We already have an event center, and it's at Wing Stadium. It's not.
There's some interesting. I'll let you finish, but there's some interesting things to talk about when it comes to wings.
Yeah,
from this article.
but that goes back to my point. We have event centers all over places in Kalamazoo where you can hold an event.
There's the County Expo Center.
There's also State Theater. There's Miller. So it's not like you can't have a big budget show or something like that. But within that same token, you're taking away resources from those who already have less to build a monument to excellence near a neighborhood that's struggling, because the event stadium is going to be near the north side. Let me also remind folks that when they were taking up the lead service lines and the lead service lines on the west side, I don't think they hit the south side, east side, or north side. So and also, who's going to be going to these events? Who are they expecting that's going to also be going to said events at the event center? And how is it going to be? How is it the infrastructure is going to be paid for? How when it comes to the actual construction of it? All that money is going to be coming out of us, out of the average Americans in this city, and when that money could be going to the Kalamazoo Promise or going towards fixing the crumbling infrastructure in our city or going to raising the minimum wage in our city.
Exactly. You know, anytime a project like this is put forward, and it's like I said, you know, we tell them again and again and again what the city needs. Us working class folks who live here in Kalamazoo. You know, build some affordable housing on that spot, man. And don't tell me that, like, I'm glad you brought up Arcadia, because that was a perfectly fine place to have events and festivals and really high profile stuff, but the city priced out so many of the festivals that they couldn't even do it there anymore.
And also, a lot of the people who are living down there, a lot of those same rich folks that would want this event center, they were complaining about the noise that annoys downtown. So you had people who were living downtown complaining about the location where a lot of the events were taking place, and it's only going to subjugate those who make less than $30,000 a year to not venture downtown or not venture near these areas.
Because think about it, like, if you're talking about an event center like on the scale of like Van Andel or something like that, you're talking about events that are like 30, 45, 50, 70, $100 a ticket. You know, down at Arcadia, you know, most festivals, and they get some pretty high profile entertainment and you know, good eats and all that stuff, you know, usually no more than like $10 and $15, you know?
I mean, a good example of that.
I mean, we just had for people who are a fan of ratchet hip hop from the early 2000s, we just had P.D. Pablo, Ying Yang Twins, and Chingy at Bell's. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like we can't have fancy events here in Kalamazoo. Like, we just had P-Funk, Parliament Funkadelics here in Kalamazoo. Again,
by the way, if all you funk fans out there, I believe that is going to be George's last tour. So if you haven't seen him yet, do it.
Oh my God!
Hot Chili Peppers coming to Arcadia. There's events here, but like. Something else, I guess, about Kalamazoo and about this whole, you know, wasting money when we're told so many times that we don't have the money for things. So, like, we're, like, kind of squarely right in between Chicago and Detroit, right?
Yeah.
So in Detroit, they've been having water shutoffs for a lot of people. But all the same, they put, like, thousands of dollars of taxpayer money to just give Little Caesars a Little Caesars stadium that nobody asked for, and it's there now. In Chicago, they're also having water problems. There's a lot of lead pipes there, too. And they're trying to build a $95 million cop academy after being told they don't have the money to fix this. So this is, you know, we're just talking about this with the military budget. Like, these are not, like, putting funds for our communities, for their needs, are not pie-in-the-sky things. We don't need bread and circus, and we don't need more state-sanctioned violence. It's almost as if we're specifically trying to recreate the failures of the Roman Empire.
Also, just to add to that, for those who do not understand how event centers or how we are referring to this, a stadium is actually funded, or how it runs. I implore you to go watch John Oliver's video from last week's Tonight, talking about stadiums. These event centers or stadiums are taxpayer funded, privately owned, and they do not help and or bring money to the community that they are made. They for 9 times out of 10, it drains more money out of a community than it actually puts into the community. It's not something that's feasible when we already have things in our community that would suffice. Like Arcadia, like Wing Stadium, like the State Theaters, and we could be putting that money into other programs in our community that our community wants. You know, instead of putting money into making a stadium, how about we put money into stopping Line 5?
Yeah. Like, you know, building some actual affordable housing, or I think, like you mentioned at the top of the program,
we talked about affordable housing. Yeah, go
some
ahead.
after school programs to support the promise. I think, like we were talking about that at the top of the program. Like, you know, one of the biggest complaints that we have about the promise is that there wasn't enough done in, like, the north and south side neighborhoods. That, you know, they essentially marketed this thing when it came out. It's like, it's going to help all the low income working class people be able to go to school, and the net effect is certain graduations have gone higher, but in particularly in the lower income neighborhoods, and particularly when it comes to persons of color in the neighborhood, there has not been enough done to actually make that promise accessible to them. Sorry, Nora, did you have something?
Something else that's like really offensive about this whole plan for an event center is that our current mayor, Bobby Hopewell, said he didn't know plans for the event center were back on.
Yeah, it's just what's a surprise to him. He's just walking.
And he's planning a meeting later on with representatives from Southwest Michigan first, because of course he is.
Yeah.
And
great things usually come out of those.
Yeah, no kidding. What else? I was gonna say a thing.
Well, I did want to mention, let's talk about Wing Stadium. So that's another thing to bring up. It's like we already have an event center, and Ron Kitchens is like, well, it's it's not downtown. That's basically what the Southwest Michigan.
It's not close enough.
Yeah, but it is. It's right off I-94. You can get. I mean, if you're poor, you can get there on the bus, especially now that the buses are running later. But here's something I found really interesting. I think you mentioned Lawrence. Like, well, who owns Wings Event Center? Wouldn't they be in danger like a competitor? And it's like, well, here's really interesting. I think it just kind of proves just more about how incestuous the billionaire class in this city is. But so Kalamazoo Wings, the stadium they play out of. That's owned by, drum roll please, Bill Johnston.
Bill Johnston.
Chairman of Greenleaf Trust. And what they don't mention in the article is former CEO of, would you guess it? Southwest Michigan First. And also, guess who used to own the Kalamazoo Wings? Just a little bit of trivia.
Who is it?
Ted and Martha Parfett. The parents of Bill Parfett. And of course, it was Bill Parfett and William Johnson that started that whole Foundation for Excellence thing.
That's an interesting coincidence.
Yeah.
Golly gee.
It's almost like they're trying to find new ways to hide their money. Here's the thing. Like I'm not gonna throw shade at these people. I'm not mad at them for wanting them. I'm not mad at them for wanting to make money, and I'm not mad at them for wanting to build their version of pyramids. I'm not mad at you. You got your hustle. You make your money. My thing is this: if you want to help Kalamazoo, and you truly feel that you need to help our community. Well, Greenleaf Trust, y'all also are mega donors to the 2 hospitals. How about you put some more money into the hospitals so they don't overcharge the people in our community? How about y'all put money into more environmental studies so we can find out why in the hell the sewage plant smells like hot garbage every other day on the north side and on the east side? How about we put more effort into saying that anybody who lives in Kalamazoo or lives in the Kalamazoo area want to go to public college, that y'all will pay for their tuition? There's other ways to stimulate the economy besides putting up this stadium.
So if they want to use city taxpayer funds to, build this stadium, and if a lot of the city funds are now supposed to come from the Foundation of Excellence that they would donate to, why don't they just pay it for themselves? They want this event center so badly.
No. How about this? If it's taxpayer funded, how about the people of Kalamazoo who's paying for it is in control of it?
Yeah,
and they can profit from it,
and we profit from it.
Yes.
I mean, can that be a part of that negotiation?
Build the stadium, but make it a worker co-op. Yeah,
make it a worker co-op.
Yeah,
I'm just all I'm saying is if they want to use taxpayer money to build a privately owned business, then that privately owned business needs to have 70 to 80% of the power of that said business needs to go to the community and not the privately owned billionaire.
Yep, because that's what exactly the second thing you just said. That's been the model in all these other cities. That's Little Caesars Arena. People of Detroit do not have control over that place, man.
No, but in Wisconsin, in Green Bay, that's owned by the community. The team, like I'm talking about the Green Bay Packers, they're owned by the community.
Yep.
The reason
I'm surprised they haven't got privatized yet.
No, they're not privatized. The reason why they're not privatized is because the community was like, nah. The story about the Green Bay Packers and why they're not privatized and why they're so unique compared to the other football teams is a really interesting story. There's a bunch of documentaries that's on it. I highly advise everybody to look it up.
I think I want to watch this and then go to the city commission and then talk about it.
Yeah. No, but like it's amazing. It's amazing to me how our needs in our community will be overlooked so that we can have something shiny to distract us. And how the billionaire class are more than happy to put this shiny thing in front of us.
Yeah, and like I think a lot of people would probably just vote yes on this because they're like, oh, dude, I'd get to see what's some stadium act that's really big right now? Like I'd get to see
Bruno Mars at
Bruno Mars
or Kevin. I get to see. Here's the thing: Kevin Hart was just in Kalamazoo.
Oh yeah,
like Kevin Hart just got done selling out the stadium.
Yeah.
So it's like it's not like that's the thing that makes me laugh. It's not like you didn't have the Lion King and Phantom of the Opera. They were just at Miller. Like you know, say like you've had big acts that's been in Kalamazoo before. One of my favorite events that I've ever been to in Kalamazoo was the funk festival that they had a couple years ago where they brought Zapp and Roger. In Arcadia. And Arcadia was packed. Like 50,000 people came down and got down with Zapp. I was like, yeah.
You know what, I'll tell you what. If I decide to run for city commission, that's my slogan. Make Kalamazoo funky again. Oh, man. I did want to mention, too, just kind of like capping this all off, the quote at the top here that really maybe bothered me the most was Ron Kitchens talking about we need to recruit more Gen Xers, millennials, college-educated individuals. And here's my problem, and I met with so many people, at the top of the government here in Kalamazoo, and I'll never forget this interaction I had with Bobby Hopewell once.
Oh boy!
And granted, he's on the way out, and this isn't even to say anything against Bobby Hopewell, but this is just how a lot of people in the city administration, people in power in the city think. We were talking about what to do with that building right by Papa Pete's, the old firehouse. And everybody there was talking about, affordable housing, gardens, worker co-ops. And Bobby shows me this picture of like this outdoor market, like kind of like what you'd see in like New York City or something. And I'm looking at this, and in my head I'm thinking, it's like, we already have that. We literally have that's the
right
Kalamazoo Mall. It's like right there.
If you want to talk about, local. You want to talk about urban gardening. Yeah. We could put more. Talk about having more organic. We have. If you want to talk about things that would help our community, there's a lot of communities in our city that are either food deserts or pharmacy deserts. And a lot of times they were banking deserts. Like you have to take 2-3 buses just to get somewhere. Damn. Just to get either fresh produce or get banking information or even pharmacy drugs. The north side for a long time before Park Street Market was that. Right. I remember when before Christian Life Center was Christian Life Center, there was a Myers. And then when that shut down, the north side became a food desert.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So it's not like we don't still have some of these problems. My thing is that we should, put more of our money into those type of things instead of.
Well, yeah, and it's like I'm probably just going to be kind of rephrasing what you just said, but like it just makes me so mad that the modus operandi of so many people, so many of the rich in the city, so many people in our city government is do things to like draw new people in rather than trying to help people who already live here, try to make them stronger economically so that they can contribute more to our local economy instead of building stadiums in order to draw in Gen Xers and millennials and keep college-educated people here.
I just have one question. How much are the apartments downtown? Like I would love to find out how much are the living spaces downtown.
Yeah.
Okay, so I live pretty close to downtown, actually, right on the edge of Vine and downtown. My rent's about like a bit over $500 for one room, and I guess closer to downtown, depending on where you go, it could be around $600. But like, you know, you need to like make sure you have enough housemates and everything.
I do know for a fact, like the new buildings that they're building up, and we talked about this on the show a couple weeks ago. Those range from $800 to $1,200.
Here's the thing.
I'm talking about these are the cheap end of downtown, by the way.
No. But here's the thing. We talked about affordable housing, and we've talked about the policy of affordable housing. We've seen the model of affordable housing in other countries around the world, and the model works. Even in our country, in Seattle, and also in Salt Lake City, they've done programs to reduce their homeless population. And what they did was they were giving people unfurnished basically small studio apartments to help people to get off the street. And it helps with people's psyche, that they have a place to stay, that they have a roof over their head, that they're not going to be sleeping on the ground outside where they could be assaulted. Like besides our homeless population that's been going on in our community, the fact that rent has increased over the last couple of years in our community, those are things that people struggle with, that could be helped with the money, that instead of us, if the taxes from food and drinks and non-alcoholic beverages were going towards that instead of a stadium, I would not have a problem with it.
Yep. Totally agree. And I think, like, Nora, do you have anything else on this topic, or should we take a break?
I guess on the topic of like keeping Gen Xers and millennials, like this is a college town. Don't forget, we're at a Western station right now, but like a lot of that's concentrated on the west side, and a lot of stuff that this resources that the city does give end up going to the west side of town by the colleges, so people can keep wanting to buy there. Now, I could say, at least from my experience, the west side appears to be doing like fine. Like, I've lived there for most of my experience here in Kalamazoo. They've apparently been the only side of town that's really been getting their contaminated pipes replaced. And if you want to keep these millennials and Gen Xers that are college educated, that like most likely, like, you know, such as myself, who come from out of town to go to college, they like it here and they decided to stay. If you want to keep them, you need to actually put jobs for these kids in the city, and you need to like give the city the resources it needs, that people will feel like this is a functioning community that people want to live in.
I hear that. All right, we're gonna take a little break. When we come back, it being the 4th of July, and if you heard that we've been celebrating, that's a worldwide lie. Flavor. We're going to talk a little bit about the American history that y'all probably don't hear about. So keep your dial locked. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Fireworks can be fun, but also dangerous. When using fireworks, always have a hose or bucket of water on site. Properly dispose of fireworks by soaking them before throwing them away. And throughout the season, please be considerate of those who are sensitive to loud noises, especially the elderly, veterans, children, and pets. Thanks for keeping it tuned to Wider, and have a fun and safe 4th of July.
Open slot in the Wider Clock and could be filled with an underwriting announcement for your local Kalamazoo business. For more information, please visit widerfm.org and head to the contact page.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. How are y'all doing today? We are back. Let's see. A little distracted here.
So we're going to talk about interesting aspects of American history, specifically what I guess a more honest take on what was going on with the American Revolution, and a little bit of more fascinating little characteristics about our so-called founding fathers.
Oh yeah, and because I really did want to let's go and talk about the founding fathers, because there's this whole mythology around our founding fathers, and people on the left and the right always like to invoke them as paragons of virtue, saying, no, the founding fathers wouldn't have wanted this. Oh, they sure would have. They would have been totally fine. And well, the founding fathers, no, they were problematic. We brought up some of this stuff on the show before. Particularly, I think on the last show we talked about just how undemocratic the founding fathers actually were. And granted, it was a step up from the kind of monarchy at the time, but it was a very self-serving kind of liberty that they wanted. And they certainly did not want rule of the majority, or at least they did not want populist rule. The way our country was set up from the beginning, initially you had to be white and landowning in order to vote.
And a man.
White, male, landowning. Which is really basically just a kind of a small step up from feudalism.
Because landowning meant you had like a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially back then.
There were a couple states that early on allowed everyone to vote, all white men, I should say, to vote. I guess early on in history, I think Pennsylvania was the first state to do so. But this is with a mixture of a bunch of other states that didn't have that system in place. So you'd have an electoral college that was picked by the state house, one that was picked by the actual people, one that was picked by the landowners. It's kind of a mess.
Mm-hmm. So let's do something a little fun first. We talk about it's funny talking about civility when you go back to Congress in the 19th and 18th century, and senators and congresswomen would actually start beating each other with canes right on the Senate and House floor when things got contentious. And that was certainly true of our founding fathers too. And I just want to read this because oh my goodness, this is gold. This is from an article talking about how 7 ways Donald Trump is just like the founding fathers. And this is so something that when Jefferson and Adams were running against each other for the presidency, Jefferson's supporters described Adams as a hideous hermaphroditical character, which has neither the force and firmness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman. Just basically. What the Trump equivalent of that would probably be he's like an ugly man woman. Yeah. He doesn't even know what the heck he is. Yeah. It's let's see, here's another gold one. Thomas Paine, the famous one of the most famous pieces of literature in the American canon, Common Sense, author of Common Sense. A Harvard historian said that critics of Tom Paine described him as horribly ugly, smelly, rude, and relentlessly cruel, causing his first wife's death by beating her while she was pregnant and abusing his second wife almost as badly, except that she wasn't really his wife because he never consummated that marriage, preferring instead to have sex with cats.
Holy moly.
Oh, man. We all know what Jefferson did, basically the rape of his slaves, which It's not a very good thing, but they were all basically misogynistic in their own way. Benjamin Franklin, actually, we're going to talk about Benjamin Franklin a little bit more. He wrote a sex advice column, and he wrote ruminations on why younger men should have affairs with older women, because regarding what is only below the girdle, it is impossible of two women to know an old from a young. And described his colleague, Sam Adams, as his whole life has been one continued insult to good manners and to decency.
Ben Franklin was in and out involved in a French sex cult for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Frequently called each other cowards. That was a big thing. Let's see. They question each other's brains and spines. This is a good one from John Adams. That Washington is not a scholar is certain, John Adams said. That he is too illiterate, unlearned, unread for his station is equally beyond dispute.
Basically calling him dumb.
Yes, yeah. So, basically the same kind of insulting rhetoric. Now, I mean, the only difference is, this language sounds a little bit more flowery, maybe, simply because it's from the 18th century, but it's not really outside of the realm of how American politics have really been since the beginning. And it's also things that have been like American politics at the beginning. I wanted to bring up an example. Since we talked so much about immigration today, the scapegoating of immigrants is nothing new. It goes literally back to before the founding of our country. I want to read some quotes from Benjamin Franklin. He's speaking, and I'm going to leave it up to you to figure out who he's speaking about. He said, "Those who come hither are generally of the most ignorant, stupid sort of their own nation." Isn't that kind of like Trump saying, they're not sending their best, And that was Benjamin Franklin. He also said, "Not being used to liberty, they know not how to make a modest use of it." And you could compare that easily to they come from these nations where they make their women wear things on their heads, and they don't know our way, this one again is very dog whistly. "The Spaniards, Italians, French, Russian, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted." So there's some straight up white supremacy from dear founding father Benjamin Franklin. And
they all owned slaves.
Oh, yeah.
They all killed the natives.
Yeah. And also wanted to, this last quote, just to really pin down that through line from the beginning of our history to where we're at now. He asks, "Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt to our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion?" Now,
tremendous, believe me.
Tremendous, believe me. I feel like I just watched ye old Fox News. That's... And it's he would write these articles in newspapers and drum up anti-immigrant sentiment. And as you could tell, he was most of his ire was directed at European immigrants. But yeah, keep in mind, and even a lot of people think of these founding fathers as being somehow innately progressive, but they're not. And Franklin wasn't the only one. Let's look at who do you think is the most kind of identity politics progressive of the founding fathers? Probably be Alexander Hamilton. He even had a rap musical made about him, right? Yeah. I think he's probably a pretty cool when it comes to that. I mean, he was kind of an immigrant himself, right? Well, no. There's even a lyric in the musical, immigrants, we get the job done. But the very same person supported the John Adams 1798 Alien and Sedition Act. That increased the U.S. residency requirement for U.S. citizenship from 5 years to 14.
Wow.
It's back down to 5 now. It allowed the president to forcefully deport immigrants. And here's what Hamilton had to say about immigrants. He said, the influx of foreigners must, therefore, tend to produce a heterogeneous compound, to change and corrupt the national spirit, to complicate and confound public opinion, to introduce foreign propensities. And he said, in response to like the extermination of Native Americans, he said, perhaps a lesson is here taught which ought not to be despised. He said of the friendliness they initially showed to the settlers. So
this has no sense of irony. Like they literally just came into this new country of theirs, and all of a sudden they don't want other people coming into this new country of theirs.
Yeah, and so like, you know, I mean, that's a sad thing to think. If you're on the left, you consider yourself a liberal, and you try to say, no, the founding fathers never meant it to be this way. Unfortunately, they were a lot more like Trump than they were Bernie Sanders or even like Barack Obama. So, you know, that's a really sad part of our history. A lot of people don't really understand. So
they grew weed though.
They
Lots
did.
Of it.
Oh, they did grow weed. They were very libertarian. I can see why the libertarians like them so much. Yeah, especially the right libertarians. You know, like I love weed, but F poor people. So, I wanted to kind of end the broadcast by playing some footage from this really great interview. This was on the Empire Files. And in it, she is talking to Professor Gerald Horne, and he's written some really great history books that really go back to some of the old historical documents. He's speaking from a person of he's black, and he's really examining the history around the American Revolution from a critical and different lens, uncovering a lot of documents and history that most people don't really talk about. So I'm going to start him off, and he's going to start talking a little bit about some of the origins of the Second Amendment, and then talk about why the Founding Fathers really actually wanted to have a revolution. So let me get this queued up real quick for y'all, everyone.
States today, without understanding the violence that led to the creation of this nation. For example, this fabled Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, which helps to justify individuals carrying arms, even into classrooms, believe it or not. It comes from a time when the framers of the Constitution felt that there needed to be militias to suppress revolts of enslaved Africans, that is to say, armed citizenry, European citizenry, to repress armed Africans, and of course rampaging, marauding Native Americans at the same time. And this is causing some in London to reconsider the very nature of this project of colonialism based upon enslavement of Africans. And so in 1772, you have Somerset's case, which seems to suggest that London is going to move towards the abolition of slavery. Certainly, as a result of Somerset's case, slavery is abolished in England. Shortly thereafter in Scotland. This infuriates and arouses the slave-owning class in the United States, led by George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. Even in the North, John Adams in Boston is a lawyer for slave owners. John Hancock, whose signature is on the founding document, of course, is one of the biggest slave owners in New England. Rather than see this form of property be abolished, causing great losses in their income, they revolt against the crown. I should also say that in 1763, there was the Royal Proclamation, where London was tiring of expending blood and treasure, moving westward, fighting Native Americans, taking their land. But George Washington, a land speculator, a real estate speculator, not unlike the current occupant of the White House, by the way, felt that this would jeopardize his future projects, and that's a further reason to revolt. So in other words, the revolt leading to foundation of the United States was based upon continuation of the slave trade, continuation of slavery, and continually fighting the Native Americans to take their land.
We learn a lot about the Boston Tea Party, right? This emancipation from taxation. What was really behind the rebellion?
there were those in London who felt that slavery and dispossession of Native Americans had to be restrained. And one way to do that was taxes, putting a tax on imports of Africans. And if you had less Africans, there would be less of a need for land of the Native Americans. But of course, there were those in North America who objected to that kind of taxation.
So now we get to 1776 and what we know as the American Revolution, which you call a counter-revolution. Why?
I call it that because it's an attempt to reverse the tides of history. Britain was moving towards abolition of slavery, but also to limit their ability, the settlers' ability to steal Native Americans' land. And rather than accede to that decision, they rebelled. Now, that sounds like a counter-revolution to me, and I think it sheds light on some of the problems we still have in the United States of America. Problems in terms of how the black population is treated, in terms of still seen as enemies of the state, because historians have known for quite a long time that by several orders of magnitude, the Africans in North America sided with London in that fight in 1776. They did not side with the settlers, except that the historians haven't drawn the inference, the reasonable inference from that they were opposed to the settlers' project. And when you fight a war and lose, as the Africans did, as my ancestors did, you can expect to be pulverized and punished forevermore until you're able to turn the tables.
Karl Marx said that capitalism came into being with the blood of African slaves gushing from its every pore.
That's right.
How did slavery provide the basis for the rise of capitalism in the U.S.?
First of all, in terms of cotton, which is this major export market, and this major export opportunity. The textile mills of Western Europe were supplied by the labor of enslaved Africans. It's felt that in 1860, at the time the U.S. Civil War was about to commence, that the most valuable investment in the United States was the investment in the bodies of enslaved Africans. You should also know that even though slavery was mostly centered in the South, a lot of the financing of the slave trade was actually in New York. A lot of the slave ships were leaving from Baltimore and Boston. Rhode Island had been a center of the African slave trade for the longest. So in other words, the ships were being dispatched from the North. Keep in mind as well that after the United States supposedly abolished the international slave trade under London and Haitian pressure, circa 1808, an illegal slave trade commenced. But you should also know that after 1865, you had a kind of diaspora. That is to say that slave owners wanted slavery to continue. So many of them moved with their enslaved Africans to Cuba, where slavery didn't end until the 1880s. Many of them moved to Brazil with their enslaved Africans, where slavery doesn't end until 1888. And of course, many of them moved to the South Seas, where they began to kidnap Melanesians and Polynesians and take them to work as bonded laborers in Queensland, Australia, and in Fiji in particular. That's one of the reasons why the Hawaii Kingdom was overthrown, because it tries to object, and for objecting, it winds up being overthrown as well.
Unbelievable. Yeah, you're even saying free Africans within the U.S. were getting kidnapped and brought to the South.
Yeah, not only that, but dark-skinned, well, oh my goodness. Dark-skinned people anywhere on planet Earth were unsafe because U.S. ships, I mean, they'd sell into Argentina, for example. Let's say Argentina had abolished slavery. They'd see a dark-skinned person walking down the street, they'd kidnap him. Next thing you know, he's in Louisiana working on a slavery plantation. So you cannot begin to understand the great wealth of the United States of America without understanding the slave trade and slavery. I remember in 1989 when there was all the unrest in Eastern Europe and there was this idea that these countries were going to build societies like the United States. Well, I was thinking to myself, well, yeah, if you have hundreds of years of slavery and you can get people to work for free, sure, you can build an advanced society too. It's scandalous what has taken place in this country. And sadly enough, the revelations are just beginning to come out, in part because for decades, part of the problem with writing history in the United States is people like me, people of my ancestry, were not allowed into archives. That's only been a development of the last few decades. And now that that's the case, now I can go into the archives and uncover the stories, and that wasn't possible previously.
And let's move on to the Civil War. So many narratives here. On one hand, we're told that these altruistic leaders just really wanted to end slavery, right? On the other hand, it had nothing to do with slavery. Your thoughts?
It has everything to do with slavery. And I think my argument is that the so-called Confederate States of America, which rebels against Washington in order to perpetuate slavery forevermore, there's a reason why there are still Confederate monuments in the United States of America. Usually when you lose a war, you don't have monuments built to the losers. But even Los Angeles, where we're now sitting, there are still monuments to Confederates. There was just an article in the LA Times about that a few days ago. Certainly in the South, in Texas, and Mississippi, Alabama, there are monuments to losers. And I think that the reason is that the Confederates felt that they were walking the footsteps of 1776, and that Washington, which was under tremendous pressure from British abolitionists, Britain being the major superpower of that time. So Washington was seeking to accede to international pressure. The Confederates, that is to say Dixie, Virginia, Texas, were digging in their heels and saying, hell no. And then that leads to the Civil War. The sainted Abraham Lincoln wants to resolve this conflict in part by enlisting Negroes, black people, to fight against the Confederates. And that, of course, was the turning point in terms of defeating the Confederates, who actually were losing. The Confederates were winning up until Lincoln makes that fateful decision. But then, until maybe a few months before he was shot in 1865, his idea was to deport all the Negroes. There was talk about deporting us to Dominican Republic. I've often told graduate students that somebody could write a very interesting book on all the different attempts to expel black people from North America, going back to the founding of the United States. Continuing through the 1930s, when there was this African resettlement bill filed by Senator Theodore Bilbo of Mississippi to get rid of all the Negroes. My book on Haiti basically ends with the failed attempt to deport all the U.S. Negroes to the Dominican Republic. It only fails by a very slim margin in the U.S. Congress. Otherwise, there might not be any black people in the United States to this very day.
How was the
All right, this seems a good place to leave that clip off of. If you're interested in learning more, that episode is look up on YouTube Empire Files, American Revolution Waged for Slavery, and it's about a 30-minute episode. I'd really recommend you watch the whole thing. It's very revelatory. And that Professor Gerald Horne, his book about this, it's called The Counter-Revolution of 1776, Slave Resistance and the Origins of the United States. So, as we close out the program, Nora, you got any parting thoughts?
Yeah, so tonight a lot of us are we're going to have our hot dogs, we'll eat our apple pie, and we're going to watch the fireworks, and I'm sure a lot of us are going to celebrate with our families. And it's not like any of us hate this country, but we've been fed a lot of stuff that we're the best, we have all this freedom, we have this great standard of living, we're a nation of immigrants, all this fantastic stuff. But it's knowing who we are and what we've done, it's sorely disappointing at how much we're not living up to our potential as a nation. And I still want to like this place, but it's hard to, especially nowadays. But it's where I was born and raised, and that's the case for a lot of us. We're kind of stuck here.
Yep. So
make the most of it. Know your history, know where you come from, and do your part for your community. Those are my parting 4th of July thoughts.
And I'd only finish because that really sums it up. But I was just gonna say we just spent a lot of time talking about founding fathers. I'll tell you this. If you want to look for some founding figures, here's some people to look into. Angela Davis, Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass,
Marsha P. Johnson,
John Brown, Marsha P. Johnson, that's right. So on and so forth. There is a good America. There is parts of America to be patriotic about, but certainly ain't a bunch of old white men. That's for sure. All right, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. And happy Colonizers Day, everybody. Yeah.